Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so hi everyone. My name is Nuno Garcia. I'm a professor at the Faculty of Sciences, University of Lisbon. I've been around for a while, so I have a very long-standing interest on human rights and not so long, in fact, for the past maybe 15 years in digital human rights, or as we call them nowadays. So I'm 57 years old, married, I have 2 kids, I live in Portugal, as you may have guessed, and I'm a computer scientist, to say something like regarding my professional area of interest. So what else can I mention that is worth saying in this context? I'm not sure, but please feel free to pop in and ask me questions as we are going to share some thoughts on the topic of today's talk, which was supposed to be something else, Glenn, and then I realized that I had this very nice subtitle that could work here, and the subtitle is "When Technology is the Excuse to Do Tons of Stuff." So
Okay.
this is what we're being fed, actually.
Well, great. We're all looking forward to it. So please go ahead. You tell me when to hit the next slide.
Oh, okay. So you have the slides there already. That's perfect. I was getting ready to pass the slides. So okay. So why is this slide showing something like, you can see it in black, actually in white over black, global digital human rights network. So this is a cost action. I'm guessing that many of you are not from Europe, but cost actions are a European initiative that is sponsored by the European Union, and not only by European Union. For example, Australia has also a part in it, and of course, United Kingdom nowadays, and we can also have some partners from the United States. This is an open network, so this means that although this global digital human rights network is already running for 2 or 3 years now, everybody is welcome to come in and participate in the works of this network. So this network is chaired by a colleague in Tallinn, Estonia. He's a professor in the law school. And what we do here is, of course, we study at the global level the digital human rights. So there's a lot of law professors, there's a couple of computer scientists, there are sociologists, and so on and so forth. So we kind of anchor this kind of discussions in the context of this network. So having introduced this, I invite you to go over and Google the Global Digital Human Rights Network. And if you are interested in any of the areas, please contact Mark Suzy, who is the chair of the action, or just contact me and I'll pass you through so you can be part of this network.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so next slide, please. So the idea was to discuss when technology is used as an excuse for anything else. And the reason why technology is excused is because we put a lot of pressure on technology. We kind of rely on technology to fulfill the tasks that we actually have to do, and for some reason we are not able to do so. And the clearest example of technology that has been serving us, and when I say us, I mean humanity, for a very long time, is language, or writing, if you wish. So many years ago, you may recognize these drawings here, these cartoons here. We had the Jetsons from the Hanna-Barbera publishing. I was a fan of these cartoons, and one of the things that actually interests me nowadays is something called paleofuturology, which means that we go back and we try to see how in the old days the future was being perceived. And you can see from these slides that we can see that devices that were not wearable, they were not portable, they were wireless still. Okay, you can see tracks of some antennas in there. The work of an average worker would be pushing knobs and levers, and yes, there was a very sexist approach to society, but still, the future, as was seen from the 60s of the previous century, already acknowledged the use or the presence of, for example, telework or devices that would stay in our houses and allow us to communicate in a seamless manner with the members of our family. Next, please. So our next slide kind of shows something that I found in Addis Ababa. It's curious that Stacy was mentioning Addis a moment ago. So this is a picture I took in 2012. And it shows a man holding a smartphone, standing in front of some very traditional drums. So this was a participant in a traditional wedding. So they were singing, they would be dancing, they would play the drums. But this proves the point that nobody nowadays feels disconnected from the rest of society, whichever level of society we're discussing here. And we tend to use technology pervasively, even if we are set in a remote environment, such as, for example, Addis Ababa, and we are in a traditional wedding. We cannot be separated from technology. And of course, as I mentioned before, technology is not necessarily the same thing as computers. We use technology in every day. In fact, if we look at this gentleman, you can see there's an electric lamp on the background. He's probably wearing shoes that were probably manufactured in China. So we could discuss to length the manners in which technology is present in this picture. And next, please. And in fact, technology has been evolved in such a fast manner that we do have these things brought into our daily life, such as bring your own device. We now work from home. We now are digital nomads. And the way we perceive our humanity, the way we see ourselves as humans, of course, includes and relies heavily on the use of mobile communications and on the internet. To such an extent that mobile devices are a very important support regarding the way we live our daily lives in this 21st century. And this brings forward questions such as, if I'm not connected, am I still a full member of society? How do I get informed? How can we do things that are really useful, in the sense that internet needs to be used on smartphones? And for example, in the sense that smartphones are not just a useful gadget, they are a tool that allows us to be connected and human in today. And this is of course something that leads us to another question. In the next slide, please. That is in fact the internet access a human right? So Windsurf, whom you know is one of the pioneers and fathers of the internet, says no. He has a very interesting paper published by the New York Times, actually an interview, where he says, no, internet access is not the human right. Okay, there are many things in the Charter of Human Rights who are human rights, of course, and they don't necessarily imply to have internet access. But they do imply, for example, in having access to books and to libraries. When the Human Charter was drafted way in the middle of the 20th century, that was the technology that we had to support the underlying need, for example, for education, for culture. But nowadays, we do have something different. Most of us only pick up a book when we want to be secluded and in a quiet place and read disconnected from the rest of the world, because most of the times we read on the internet. And of course, the United Nations has said that forbidding the access to the internet is a violation of the human rights in international law. So we're kind of we're kind of here in a very fuzzy place where we have the forefathers of the internet or the fathers of the internet saying, no, this is not a human right. And the United Nations and most of the people I know, for that matter, saying, yeah, forbidding internet access is actually a violation of human rights. So this can seem like there's a contradiction here, but not so much. This is a matter of detail. So there's a question by Bill that I'm going to address right now, Glenn, because it's right on topic. It says, can human rights be something which changes when technology changes? I don't think so. So human rights are human rights, period. But for example, if I was to say you cannot access a library until you are 35 years old because there may be books in there that can change the way you naturally think, then you would say this is complete nonsense. Yeah. So internet is just a medium. So if you don't have access to internet, you can still exercise your rights in the full extent of what they mean. But for most of us, having access to internet is like having access to radio or to television or to books in the old days. So the medium has changed, and conditioning the access to the medium may, in fact, jeopardize the exercise of human rights. I hope I have addressed your question. So in the next slide, yes, please.
If I can interrupt, one of the big things, the U.S. has a policy called Internet for All, which they're spending billions of dollars to give access to tribal and low-income communities and rural communities throughout the United States. And we have the same sort of situation in Canada with our government making an effort to provide open access to far north in tribal areas. The biggest problem that I'm seeing, both US and Canada, they're providing this lifeline, they call it, but it's not high speed. So there's like, it's a road, but it sure is not a 4-lane superhighway. These are really basic internet connections. It's not like something you have the same level of high-speed internet access that you'll find in more dense, more rich areas. So we have a bit of a digital divide here. They have access, but it's like a bowl of rice. There is no meat, there's no vegetables. It's not a full nutritional meal. So it's a slightly different thing on the human rights issue. They have basic access, but the basic access is not high speed. And I know in the legislature in the province of Nova Scotia, they were suing that high speed internet access is a human right. So what's your view on that?
Oh, that's a great question. That's a great question. I didn't consider it because in Europe, in fact, what happens is that when a company is awarded rights to expand its network, it's part of the duties of that company to provide access to rural areas. So you may end up finding that some very small village in the center, in the part of Portugal, with Haiti people living there, has fiber connectivity. And of course, that is not viable from a commercial point of view. But what it is viable is that this company actually laid down the optical fiber to that very remote village, has also laid fiber to a very high densely populated neighborhood in Lisbon or in Porto or in some other major city. So they kind of design the licensing of the internet expansion in a manner that if you're going to lay down fiber in this neighborhood, which of course will yield a high profit for your company, then you have also to do the same thing in this remote area where there's absolutely nobody and you're going to make like 100 euros per month in subscriptions or something like that. So is high-speed internet a human right? Well, if you can argue that you cannot have access to contents that are relevant from the human right perspective unless you have a high-speed access, then I would say yes. I'm not convinced, though. I'm not convinced. Okay. Yeah, but this is something that policy and policymakers are usually aware, and of course they exert their own rights, the rights to kind of maintain the connectivity, the coherence, the identity of a region. Yeah, because if you lay that only to private initiative, then the companies will lay fiber and give access only where they see the market and not in the remote places.
Okay.
So yeah,
Thank you.
that was not the real question. There's not a real answer, but I don't have answers for everything. So, and actually, this points exactly to this slide. So, as consumers, we have expectations, yeah, and we want the best for free as much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, providers, they need to pay salaries, they need to pay for the fiber, they need to pay for taxes and for licenses and so on. So they want the maximum return possible. So there's a trade-off here, because these two things are not fully compatible. Yeah. So this actually creates problems. Not so much, for example, as in the fiber, because they're kind of used to this type of needs. So they actually sometimes they look for remote villages where they can put the fiber, so they can get in return a very juicy area where they can put also the fiber to access their customers. But in the mobile zone, and of course, I understand that mobile coverage in Europe is not the same thing as mobile coverage in the United States, because, as you know, we have almost 100% coverage of all the territory in Europe regarding mobile coverage, 4G and 5G and stuff like that. So the problem is that it's hard for the providers to stick to the need to monetize their own investments. Can we go to the next slide, please? So in the last years, we have seen an effort from the part of policymakers. It was a beautiful, beautiful effort, I must say. Everyone who has ever traveled in Europe feels really relieved that you can go from Lisbon to the far end of Estonia and have the same network with the same data plans, with no additional charges, and so on and so forth. So this works beautifully, including in the US. When I made these slides, I was kind of expecting that Brexit would cause the British operators to disconnect from the EU mobile roaming space, which in fact has not happened yet, and I'm not sure if it will happen. So we are all good in this part, except for Switzerland. Yeah, if you go to Switzerland, or if you go to countries in the Balkan area, such as, for example, Macedonia or something like that, then you will have to buy your own SIM card to get roaming and to get mobility and to get data to decent prices. So it seems like we are still getting the free internet as much as possible, in the sense that Kevin Kelly mentioned in a very brilliant talk he gave in 2007 in TED Talk. So if you've not seen it, I do advise you to take a quick look. It's quite old now, but it's still worth it to see how the internet was initially perceived in the old days, in the first days of the Wired magazine. Can you go to the next slide, please?
Okay.
So what are the problems here? The problems is that internet providers, they tend to monetize what we think is a right. And our problem is that when they do this, they jeopardize the rights of the most frail and the least economically wealthy. And one of the things that we have seen and we have not yet found how can I say, solution to it, is that when we do buy some sort of mobile data plan, they always say you have as much as, I don't know, 1 gigabyte, 2 gigabytes of data you can use, right? And they charge you for the traffic that you consume. And on one very legal side, the thing that strikes me the most is that when you buy electricity, when you buy water, you have these meters, and these meters, they are validated and they are accounted for because they are monitored by the regulators. But when you buy internet, nobody monitors the devices that actually measure your traffic. And in most cases, I dare to say, in most cases, these devices, they don't do the right math. So they always end up charging you more than what you have consumed. And this is so unfair that, in fact, these providers, they can artificially increase the amount of traffic that you are using just by making them pass through their servers. And you end up paying. This is the bottom line. You end up paying because this is what they want. So for me, this is a clear reason to cry out to the legislature and say, listen, these guys, they are doing their own measurements. They are not accountable. They need to be accountable for us to know that this is fair. I don't mind paying if I know that I'm getting what I've paid for. But right. nobody really can make this assertion because these machines, they are not validated. Okay. So in the next slide.
Let me just
Sure.
comment here because I've been following the U.S. situation with the Internet for All. There's a group called Net Inclusion, which has an annual conference on access to Internet. So what they did a really interesting study in Detroit called redlining. Redlining is usually Bill's from near San Francisco. He's probably familiar with the term of redlining. And usually it's around poor areas, particularly poor Black communities in Detroit and different places. Now this particular redlining was in Cleveland, and what they did is Verizon was given the contract to provide high-speed internet access to low-income communities, and they were throttling the service, so they would dial it back. So it was next to dial-up service, like a 14.4 baud. But this was a serious fight of documenting. Yes, they did this contract and it was worth millions of dollars, but they were not delivering the product that they promised to do. So those citizens, which see the internet as a tool for employment, for health information, they were getting second-class service. Very interesting study. I'll try to find that for you.
Yes, please. And then on top of that, you can add that also possibly in the US, the European governments have increasingly made an effort to be fully digital. Yeah. For example, you cannot turn in your tax declaration in Portugal unless you do it via the internet. And
right.
And of course, this poses a huge problem because if the government is pushing for the digital change, then it has to be assumed that every citizen has the right to be digitally connected in a manner that, of course, does not jeopardize his or her rights as a citizen. I'm not mentioning as a human being, let alone. Okay, I'm just standing on the citizen taxpayer stage. So this is that example is actually an example where private interests do overlap and supersede the underlying interests of the citizen himself, herself. Okay. So the thing is that although the regulators are aware and they try to as much maintain the dissemination of internet access all over Europe, in fact, it is the mobile operators or the internet operators or the internet service providers that dictate most of the rules. And in fact, they take most of the prices and they take whatever goes and goes not in their networks. And I'm not saying, for example, that if you go to Egypt or to Saudi Arabia, you will not be able to access a vast majority of sites that are considered to be offending of the values of the state. Because you have to keep in mind that these are non-secular states. So there are many issues involved in here. I'm going to stick to the legal ones and not go as far as to say that some types of content are forbidden because.
Yeah, that's a whole other rabbit hole.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And it's
I,
very.
I have to share with everybody, but GSMA, the international organization, mobile operators, has done some very good reports on the digital divide and internet connectivity. I'll share it with everyone. There, I've converted them all to ebooks, but I'll make sure you get them as well. You know.
Thank you. So it's quite easy for us Europeans, and I can imagine also Australians and Americans and so on. It's quite easy for us to have an opinion on that. It's not so easy to have this type of opinion if you are an Egyptian, or if you are a Saudi, or if you are, I don't know. So it's there is a very strong cultural and civilizational context here that most of the Western world, Northern world, kind of adopts, that it may not be suitable to other parts of the world. Okay, so we are kind of, I hope I'm not sounding or like patronizing and stuff like that. I'm aware that each country has to make its own decisions, and whichever the citizens of that country decide, it's fine. Yeah. So I think we can move to the next slide. But first, wait a minute. So first, there is this thing that comes in every contract. It's the fair use principle. Okay, so if you buy something, it's the fair use principle. We provide this access to the internet in the presumption that you as a user, you will make fair use of this access that we are giving you. Okay, so this kind of a shared responsibility. For example, I will provide you internet access, but then you cannot rent this internet access to other persons, because this would not be fair use. We'd be using much more resources than any other user in your category. Okay, so what are exactly the problems here? So I have identified two major problems, but there are more, of course. Glenn, you mentioned throttling. There are more. Okay, but I've listed two major problems here. One is data caps, and the other one is zero rating. I'm not sure if you are familiar with this. I'm sure you are. So I'm just, or do you want me to maybe explain a bit what I understand with this? Okay, I will detail this. So next slide, please. So data caps. Data caps is like when you're capping the amount of data that you're allowed to transmit over the internet service provider infrastructure. Yeah. So when you sign a contract, they will tell you you have access to download, upload these many megabytes or gigabytes through our infrastructure, because this is the way we make sure that everybody is getting access in a fair manner. But the thing that I posed, the question that we need to pose here, what if I want more? Will this harm others? And of course, the response is always the same. We will not harm others. If you pay us, we'll be fine. So the infrastructure really does not change in order to safeguard this fair use principle. My point here being that from a technological standpoint, there is no reason whatsoever to impose data caps, at least in the manner that they are being done right now. So the internet itself, the protocols, the structure has been built to resolve potential overloads that may surge in a moment or another. But for the operator point of view, he wants to protect the infrastructure. He wants to make sure that the servers will not crash. He wants to make sure that he will be able to serve everybody. And he poses data caps. But data caps are not in the least manner connected to a fair usage of the internet. Because from a very ridiculous standpoint, I can use 1 gigabyte of data minus 1 byte in the next hour and use 0 in the remaining month. And that would not be fair use. But it still falls in the lines of fair use as decided by the contract that I've signed.
Sorry, no, no. So everybody is basically in the West, I would say, young people are streaming content. They have their own, uh, um, whether on YouTube or TikTok or whatever. They're consuming or producing a lot of content. So when they design the system, and I don't think they anticipated this kind of personal use of content. So you're saying the system is so robust, it's above and beyond this sort of new use of content. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Okay.
So
Okay.
when the protocols were designed back in the 80s, or maybe even before that,
Mm-hmm.
the protocols had no manner whatsoever to anticipate that they were going to be used to transmit multimedia and video and live
Mm-hmm.
chats and calls
Yeah.
and stuff like that, like the ones we're doing right now. So for example, if you write an email and you attach a picture of a normal size, you could be sending 30,000 data packets through the internet. And each and every one of those data packets is going to occupy a time slot in each of the routers that it passes from your computer until the computer of the destination. So is this a lot? Of course it's a lot. It's 30,000 packets to send a picture over the internet. I cannot imagine how many millions of packets we are generating in this talk,
Right.
but each and every one of them is going to be analyzed and routed in each of the servers that it passes through. And when the protocols were designed, when the internet was designed, there was no anticipation that this would be how we would be using the network in these days. So it is very, very, very robust. It is extremely robust in the sense that it can cope with most of the traffic that we throw at it. And of course, if you go to that talk from Kevin Kelly, you will see that there is a comparison between the internet and the human brain. It's quite interesting. Please take a peek. Okay. So point being here that fair use has very little or nothing to do with data caps. Data caps is just a manner that they have found out to make us pay more money, to monetize our use of the internet, such as is zero rating. And in the next slide, yeah. So zero rating applies to when the operator says, yeah, you have 2 gigabytes of data, but if you use TikTok, if you use WhatsApp, if you use Facebook, if you use Instagram, if you use, I don't know, we will not charge you. So this will not count as your limit for the data that you're consuming. And this is extremely harmful in many senses. First, because most of the type of use that we make of these tools, apps that are zero rated, they really don't contribute for the world's education or for your own education or whatever. It just contribute for the amusement part. So these are the apps where they also can get money from because they can monetize the space of the apps, they can sell ads in those apps, and they can get some financial return. So the more you use them, the better for them. And on another perspective, this is also harmful because if you want to build a new Instagram type of tool, your tool will not fall into these zero-rated tools that, of course, are privileged. And this is also very bad because when the operators decide that these tools are for free and all these others are not, they are, in fact, hampering innovation in technology. And this is really, really bad. Yes, please.
Remember a couple of years ago, Facebook was providing access, but their limited access was to the Facebook platform. So they were trying to tell people this is the internet. But it was only one little window, one little glimpse, and they, I think there was a marketing problem with that because people pushed back. But I think what they did first was in India as their platform. So I'm not sure if they continued that kind of concept, but it was like, okay, we're going to help you out, your community that's poor. You don't have internet access. Here it is. But it's just like one brand, one product, very limited access. So it's a very interesting concept of altruism, with very limited resources as a result. Do you recall that?
Yeah, but we had seen it before, Glenn. Microsoft also tried to do that in the old days of the MSN network.
Mm.
They tried to do that. So I'm not sure who was in charge of Facebook and that division in particular at that time, but it was really a very poor decision. It was really a very uneducated decision because it had been tried before and it had failed. So I have no idea why they thought that this could succeed this time. Well, sometimes you see that. Sometimes you see things that failed before, and then for some type of magic, they kind of go through this other time. But yeah, it's I could see it coming. From where I stand, I could see it coming. So I'm not sure if it went through. I'm guessing not. I'm guessing not, because one of the things that we have learned over the years is that you cannot have a closed access internet, and in the limit you will end up, if you try to do that, you will end up like in North Korea, where the internet is just a network with everything highly controlled. So it's very, very complicated to manage these type of things. For example, when you have advertisers who actually pay you to get the user to their website. So how does this work? I have no idea. What was in their mind? I have no idea. Very complex and very unfeasible, I may say. So data caps and zero rating are really, really bad. I see this as a very serious problem, in the sense that they really place the user in an uncomfortable situation where people go online and they connect data and then disconnect data when they go offline. And this is very, very unhealthy for a thing that's very common to say right now, the technology stress level of the users. But there are more. And here I mentioned 3 more things that are really bad for the view of the open internet that we all have and cherish. And these 3 things are, of course, blocking, throttling, and prioritization. Yeah. So blocking, it's when the operator says, we decide which sites you are entitled to see. And this happens for religious purpose, for governmental and policy purpose, and then for commercial purposes, as you just mentioned a couple of seconds ago. But it's not good. It's not good in the sense that when you go to a library, it's not like in Hogwarts where you can only access the forbidden book division or part of the shelves when you are a student of these higher grades. So blocking is really a form of censorship. It's a technological form of censorship. Throttling is something a bit different. Throttling is what happens when, for example, I make a deal with YouTube, and if you are some other video content publisher, such as say Vimeo, then your videos will go slower than YouTube videos, and YouTube videos will go faster than Vimeo videos. Why? Not because YouTube actually streams faster, but because all the other video traffic is going to be delayed on purpose. It's going to be delayed on purpose. And the name throttling is actually misleading because it seems like you are speeding up some types of websites when in fact you're doing actually the opposite. You're slowing down your partner's competition. So this is not so bad as blocking, but it's almost as bad as blocking. Yeah? And finally, paid prioritization. It's something that you get when you say, well, if you pay me more, I will put your contents up front in our search bar. Yeah. And this is actually quite dangerous. It's actually quite dangerous, mostly when it's done in a non-disclosed and open and open manner. So if you go to a search engine and you look for, I don't know, you look for Nuno Garcia, and the results you get is from my friend Nuno Garcia, who is a movie director, and not, for example, mine, because he has paid the search engine more money to make his results up front, then this is not good. So this jeopardizes the fair data principle that must be present in all the database, in all the search engines. So in the next slide, there are many examples of attempted violations from this set of problems here that we have been aware of, mostly in the US, I have to say, because in Europe the regulators are more, how can I say, more strict. But yeah, there have been many attempts, mostly at throttling, rate prioritization, and blocking, and everybody does it. Of course, governments do it. ISPs do it if they can, and of course, for example, companies do it. Yeah, companies do it. So how does this actually needs to concern us? So you need to be aware. The next slide, please. You need to be aware that net neutrality is really important, because in the next slide, Glenn, please. Yes, yeah. Because if your network is not neutral, you're consuming content that has been biased by some decision that is not a democratic decision. That is not a decision of the government or of the courts or of the rule of law. It's a decision of the company, which of course has some interests in their agenda that are not the interests of the overall population, but are the interests of their respective shareholders. And that is really complex, and that is a huge problem for democracies. A huge problem for democracies. So if that happens, of course, what I advise people is to file a complaint with the national regulator. In Europe, of course, you have regulators. In the US, you also have regulators. Keeping awareness of these problems is very important, and we have found out that many of the users are not really aware of the data cap problem, of the zero rating problem. Most of them perceive this as a benefit when they subscribe for a given data plan, a given contract, a mobile contract. They perceive this as an advantage and not as a problem, because they make it seem it's an advantage for the consumer. Of course, marketing is all about that. And I also advise people to join the discussion of the free and open internet, which of course can be dangerous depending on the place you're living in. We have heard reports about that. So in a nutshell, almost, last slide, please. And since there is no replacement for what each and every one of us must do in this battle for the free internet, so the next slide kind of sums up the problems. So zero rating is bad, data caps is bad, blocking, throttling, prioritization are also bad. We should kind of try to end, or at least alleviate, the impact that these things have on our digital lives, because our digital life supports our real life in these days of this new 21st century. And this is it. I'm glad that you had the patience to listen to my rambles about the battle of open and free internet. and I would be more than glad to listen to your comments on this. Yep.
Okay,
Good.
great. Thank you. And I was just going to ask a question on the, and you're giving us some direction on where to go to join a group to share these views. And as you said, your email here is nmaggarcias.ulisboa.pt. And
Right.
all the slides are shared. I've given everybody the access when you go into the course. So thank you. And I want to open it up. Bill, looks like you're first in line. Go ahead.
Yeah, I understand the problems you see with making a differentiation between how different kinds of content are treated based on whether the sources of that content have paid for better access or not.
Mm-hmm.
But pretty clearly, all of this infrastructure has to be paid for somehow.
Mm-hmm.
So the question becomes, all right, if we find that particular means of paying for it to be unacceptable, what alternative methods do we like better? Perhaps something with advertising. I'm not sure what, but so somebody has to pay for putting the infrastructure in place to make the internet available at all. And maybe we decide, okay, the government's going to provide all the infrastructure and we'll pay for it from taxes. But one way or another, the money has to come from somewhere. So do you have a preference for what sorts of funds for that infrastructure you prefer?
Actually, I do. Okay, and I don't have to look far to find how this can be done, because it has been done. So let me refer again to the talk by Kevin Kelly in 2007. So back in the day, the guys at Wired Magazine thought, in the words of Kevin Kelly, of course, not mine, the guys at Wired Magazine thought that the internet was going to be like TV, but better. Okay, so now I dare to say that the internet is not only, it's not like TV, but better, but on the opposite side, it's TV, and it's increasingly like the internet. And one of the things that Kevin Kelly mentioned in this talk is that, having witnessed the deployment of the internet, he says, we need to be best in believing that the impossible can be achieved, because nobody thought that the internet would be free. And Bill, I'm guessing by the tone of your voice that you are a senior guy like me. So you remember, of course, the days of CompuServe and your days of BBSs, when if we wanted some type of information, we would have to subscribe, and of course, dial in, and of course, pay for that information. And nowadays on the internet, we get all the content for free. You are discussing something different, though. You are discussing the infrastructure, yeah. And
yeah,
it happens.
I actually am even more ancient than that, because I remember ARPANET.
Oh, you do.
But the problem I see is, I mean, that was a government built
Yes.
for its own purposes network that basically ended up running amok and becoming the internet. But the problem I see with that approach is while that works just fine in an advanced economy, there are lots of places in the world where the government simply doesn't have the funds to provide the infrastructure. So
maybe not so much. Let me disagree a little bit on that regard with you. So if you are from the days of the ARPANET, and my deep respects for that, then you know that almost all of the advances on the internet and on the web, because these are two different things, were heavily supported by the US government. So it was the US government, or it was in the US-led labs that most of the internet and the web was developed, with the honorable exception of the HTTP protocol and the HTML standards that were developed in Europe by the CERN lab, in the CERN lab, not by the CERN lab, in the CERN laboratory in Switzerland. And these were funded by many governments around the world, but mostly European. So is it really that hard to deploy the technological infrastructure for the internet? Well, it is expensive. If you think of undersea cables, if you think of deploying, for example, from scratch, a whole network of stations for mobile phones, for example. But what we have learned is that these things happen alongside the settlement of railways and the settlement of highways. And it's actually the cost of the highway and the cost of the railway that supports that very little space that runs alongside it and carries the cables. So in the end, the biggest part of the operating expenditures of the data service goes for salaries. And of course, as you know, it's in the interest of governments to have this type of personnel, highly skilled personnel in telecommunications. But there's also a significant part that goes in taxes to allow the use of spectrum, to allow the use of land, to allow the use of I don't know what. So when you say, and please excuse me if I understood this wrong, when you say, yes, we are using this infrastructure, it has to be paid in some manner. Wouldn't it be rather be paid by advertising or something like that? Yes, and it has been done. There's a mix here between state subsidies, advertising, subscription from users. It has been done. My point being that to a large extent, these data carriers, they are milking the consumers in a manner that is beyond acceptable. And my evidence of this being, for example, and we don't need to leave Europe, there are many countries in Europe who have much more beneficial data plans than others. In some countries, data plans are extremely scarce in the sense of resources. And in others, they are extremely generous in terms of resources for the user. So we don't really need to invent anything else, any new manner to fund these infrastructures. It has been done. It's on the making. So we just need to go. And trust me, telecom operator only goes bankrupt if it's really badly managed. Yes, please.
I was thinking more of, suppose you want to get internet access in Chad or Congo, where the roads aren't may not go where you would like to get the people online.
Or in India, for example. Then you would not, of course, use fiber. You would use something different. You would use satellites, low altitude satellites. You would use WiMAX, for example.
Yeah, well, and the problem with satellite, as we've seen in Ukraine is the person who puts the satellites up can decide whether he's going to provide access at all for reasons totally divorced from the economy. So, yeah, there are multiple options here and stuff, but I think there are different solutions in different circumstances, I guess is what I'm saying.
So do you guess that this case you mentioned regarding Ukraine, and we may as well give names to the persons who actually have decided. So do you actually think that Elon Musk took the decision of not providing internet? I'm not sure how this stands as we speak, okay, but I'm just basing my discourse here and what I've read on Twitter. So do you think that he made that decision purely on economic terms?
Absolutely not. I think he made it entirely on philosophical and political views that he happens to hold.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. The thing being that if it was on political terms, and if you had a true government, democratically elected government that would supervise these kind of things, either in Ukraine or, for example, in the US. I'm not saying that you are not democratic, okay? I'm just saying that it would be a huge breach. It would be a huge breach in the obligations that this company took when accepting public funds, not to provide this type of service in that area. Meaning that, yeah, the companies are what they are. Microsoft, IBM, of course, Twitter, of course, Facebook, whatever, because they received a huge amount of funding from the governments, all of the governments. And now they decide based on criteria that are not exclusively of economic nature of a public interest because of some philosophical standpoint. So is it admissible that these governments continue to fund these companies? I find it very controversial, don't you?
Okay. Any other questions for Nuno? Speak up, please. We'll open up the mic. So if you have something that you agree or disagree with, or ask a question for Nuno, just looking to see if anyone has something to say. I don't see anyone. Okay, well that wraps it up. I'll share you the recording. Thank you so much for your help. I'll send everybody and yourself the GSMA reports on digital divide on mobile. Some very interesting stuff there. Again, thank you again today. You know, we appreciate it.
Thank you so much for your patience and for putting up with a European revolutionary such as myself.
Yeah, no, this is great stuff. We can go on for, as the expression says, a month of Sundays of discussing this. We just scratched the surface, but this is great. Thank you again for joining us today. And this concludes the session. Okay, bye everybody.
To you guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All the best. Bye bye.